The radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 73, recorded on Sunday, September 11th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
I hate you so much.
You like that?
For those of you who don't know, we actually just came off a Packers and Vikings game, and the Packers lost by a lot.
Well, it was closer than maybe the final score, but
not really, man. It was a really one-sided game. It was a bad time. So we're going to talk about something way less depressing than that.
well, because we're not women.
Well, yeah, pretty much. And on today's episode, we delve into the slimy, unwashed sewers of Gamergate and how it has affected politics today. But first, the headlines.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
It's been a little bit, Jason. Let's start with some good news.
At least temporarily.
At least temporarily. I mean, it's good news. Like, it happened, at least, so I'd say it's just good news.
Mm-hmm.
Democrat Mary Peltola defeated Sarah Palin in the Alaska House special election, becoming the first Indigenous woman from Alaska to serve in the House.
Only because of that fraudulent ranked choice voting.
Oh, yeah.
I can't do a Sarah Palin, I'm sorry.
You have too many brain cells to do a proper Sarah Palin.
Smash my head on the wall.
Yeah. But no, thanks to ranked choice voting. Well, let's break it down a little bit. Long story short, it was between Begich, Palin, and Peltola, right? And kind of like what we were expecting before, that Peltola was leading.
And yeah, so that's the other thing. When everyone blames ranked choice voting, she was winning from the start.
Yeah, and again, we'll talk about this as well. So we want to try to blame ranked choice voting here. So Peltola was in first, Palin was in second, and then Begich was in third. Based on ranked choice voting, which we talked about last time, the last option gets eliminated.
Which should have favored the Republicans.
Which should have favored the Republicans. And literally, because it was Sarah Palin, so many of Begich's supporters who put Begich down as their first choice put either Peltola down as their second choice or voted nobody.
Right,
and
didn't
just left
have
it
a
blank.
second choice, which is an option.
So you're correct. If
Exhausting their
if it
ballots.
wasn't Sarah Palin, and actually probably the other way around, if Sarah Palin took third place and Begich was in second place, we would have a Republican in Congress right now.
Yes. This system, and I feel like this is why they did pick it last year, does favor the Republicans in this type of race. When you have multiple conservatives running, which are splitting the vote,
Yep.
and a single Democrat, that should help outweigh that whole issue of splitting the vote.
Correct.
But because Palin is such a divisive candidate, and so many people in Alaska and obviously the rest of the country and world dislike her so heavily, they could not even bring themselves to choose her as their second option.
Well, and that's the big thing too, is because the real campaign in Alaska was between Begich and Palin. They were attacking each other. They were kind of leaving Mary Peltola out of the whole discussion. So when we're talking about how we want to think campaigns work in this ranked choice voting system, Begich and Peltola worked together as like saying, hey, if you're going to vote for me, vote for Peltola number 2. You don't want Sarah Palin as your congressperson, do you? And that's what they did. So I think it was something on the line of like 16,000 people who were in Begich's camp voted for Peltola. And it was like a big Democratic swing for the second choice people, even though I think more people still voted for Palin, but there was just nearly like not even close to enough for her to surpass the first choice votes. So that's why Peltola won in the end.
Yeah, it tightened up slightly after the first,
It did.
but not, yeah, like you said, not enough.
So I consider this a success for ranked choice voting. I'm really happy they did this. More states should do it.
And this is just the special election to replace the deceased representative from Alaska who had been there for like a ridiculous amount of time, like 40 years or something, right?
like that,
Since like the 70s. But that seat is open again in November during the general election. And thankfully for the country, neither Begich or Palin, who both called on the other to drop out of the general election to avoid this happening again, neither one of them has dropped out. So they will both again be on the ballot in November.
And hopefully Peltola will come out the victor in that as well.
Yeah, hopefully we just have a repeat.
So good news to start this off. Let's go to some bad news. And when I want to talk about bad news, I want to talk about Joe Rogan. I can't stand Joe Rogan, Jason. I just want to make that very clear.
Not a fan.
Joe Rogan on his show urged people to vote Republican based on lessons he learned from the pandemic. And I just want to read this quote for you, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
So on his show, and of course, he's talking to Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I was hoping you didn't actually realize that. I was hit you with that.
I totally. I was
waiting.
Just as angry. And apparently, I didn't even notice this. A couple of my friends were actually saying that there was another issue with Aaron Rodgers from that same episode. I never watched it.
Yeah, me neither.
Where I guess it was Aaron Rodgers being a pseudo-scientific,
just how he has been all during this. Yeah.
So I just want to make that clear. I'm not talking about that scandal with this episode. Well, a quote from the show from Joe Rogan. That's the best you can get out of it. But as far as compensation for all of those people that were forced to close their businesses and keep their doors shuttered and lost everything they worked hard for decades to build, now they're just going to be angry. Aaron Rodgers responds by saying, well, what would you tell those people? And Rogan replied, vote Republican.
Who was in charge during the pandemic?
I believe a Republican.
Oh, okay. Well, then that makes total sense then.
But I'm so absolutely sick of people completely disregarding that there was a global pandemic that was happening.
Well, because they didn't die, so it doesn't matter, right? Like, it was nothing. Yeah, over 1 million people died, and yes, our life expectancy dropped for the second consecutive year for the first time in 100 years in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But it was nothing. Joe Rogan got COVID, famously, and literally had to be prescribed like 10 different treatments, including the one that actually works, the monoclonal antibody treatment. But no, it was at the end of it, he's still alive, so it was nothing. There was no reason for anyone to not want to just go out and have a drink at their local bar.
But I am so freaking sick of these people who have such large platforms spouting this absolute godforsaken nonsense that is doing real damage to the country, if not the entire world.
Yeah, medical misinformation has always been something that has just driven me insane for a long, long time. And I don't understand how it's so pervasive. And Joe Rogan has become, like, he's surpassing Oprah as, like, the biggest vector of medical misinformation.
Yes.
And one of the other biggest vectors of medical misinformation is currently running for Senate in Pennsylvania, even though he doesn't live there, in Dr. Oz, a snake oil salesman turned political candidate somehow.
But I'm just, okay, so actually, slight tangent here. I was listening to an episode of The Ezra Klein Show where they're doing a roundtable on education, how parents are thinking about education today. And obviously the first thing that came up was parents dealing with schooling during the pandemic and how they got really upset about the schools being closed and how they wanted schools opened again. And what made me the angriest with some of the people on that panel were the parents who were saying that their schools were not prioritizing opening up and that they didn't understand the pain that the parents and the families were going through. And there are real legitimate issues here. And the same thing that's happening with Joe Rogan as well. We understand that bad things were happening. We are just as upset that businesses had to close down. We are just as upset that there are legitimate mental health issues and educational issues that happened because of the pandemic. The schools were closed.
That's why those loans should have gone to those businesses instead of apparently every goddamn congressman.
Right, but I'm so sick of people just absolutely refusing to acknowledge that we had a global pandemic that was killing millions of people worldwide and they think this was just absolutely for no reason at all, and there was just an inconvenience to them personally by the government of the United States. I am absolutely sick of that ignorant, unaware, selfish attitude that is just destroying our country because it was just general short-sightedness. Oh, it infuriates me, man.
And for personal profit, which is exactly what Joe Rogan is getting out of it.
I hate Joe Rogan. I'm going to start with that for the sake, but I'm going to end with that. Tell your friends not to like Joe Rogan. He sucks.
Let's go back to some positive news. A judge has ordered Cowboys for Trump and January 6th seditionist Couy Griffin to be removed from office.
Now, this was the guy I think we talked about in the documentary, correct?
Yep.
They treat him like an animal.
Right, because they treated him just like they do every other prisoner.
Yeah.
And yes, prisons in America are horrible. At some point we'll have to do an episode just on the prison system and what's kind of wrong with that. But yes, it's terrible. It's dehumanizing. It is punitive. It is not rehabilitative. We do treat people like animals in prison. Welcome to the resistance? or you only care because it affects you personally?
I mean, I feel like Couey Griffin was a part of a resistance. It didn't go very well.
So due to his role in the January 6th attempted overthrow of the government, which is a violation of the 14th Amendment, he has been disqualified for office by the judge. I'm sure that'll be appealed. We'll see how it goes. But at least for right now, he is no longer the county commissioner.
Hooray.
Of Otero County, New Mexico. And related, a report came out, an analysis from some leaked information on the Oath Keepers membership. The Anti-Defamation League released their analysis of that information to reveal that many members that were in the Oath Keepers roles came from politicians. You can take one guess as to the political party that every single one of them is affiliated with. Law enforcement, firefighters, and military. Not surprising. That's kind of their whole shtick. That's what they appeal to. You can see our episode on these militia groups to get some more information specifically on the Oath Keepers, but the numbers are pretty astounding. 373 individuals in law enforcement agencies across the country, 10 chiefs of police, and 11 sheriffs. More than 1,000 individuals who they believe previously served in law enforcement, and 81 people who were currently holding or running for public office in 2022.
And
I think 6 from Wisconsin.
6 of them, actually, I have the article pulled up. So 6 of those Wisconsin officials were from Wisconsin. Hooray! Two Rivers City Council Vice President Darla LeClaire was the only one to agree to an interview, apparently.
And just in case anyone's wondering, well, what are the names? They're not releasing it publicly. They're only released it to the media. So there's only a few names that have
I gotta read this. LeClaire said in the interview, "I've had a lot of stupid moments in my life, and this was by far one of the most stupid things I've ever done. You just, when you're young and dumb, you drink, you go out and party, you join a right-wing extremist militia group trying to overthrow the government. The typical things. It's just kind of crazy.
Yeah, you wake up with a tattoo.
Yeah. Happens to be a swastika. Oh, dear. So, yeah, fun stuff.
So we'll leave a link in the show notes so you can check that out. They've got an interactive map that's broken down by state that you can check out. Again, they're not naming everyone, obviously, for reasons that you will be very familiar with from our main topic today. But it is out there. You can check it. You can check how many people from your state. No surprise to what the state where the largest number of those people come from, Texas.
And in potentially good news, are we just all rating every one of our headlines and just as if
it's good or not? Well, it's usually all bad. So when we have things that are good, it's always surprising to us. So we feel that we should mention it.
Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer recently announced that the Marriage Equality Act will come to a vote in the coming weeks.
And this is the act looking to codify same-sex marriage into law.
It is. We actually discussed this prior, where it was actually supposed to be a relatively bipartisan approved vote here, where it actually passed the House recently. I think it was 50 Republicans voting for it. And then it had about, 6 to 8 Republicans in the Senate that were going to be for it back then. But then we turned one over on Mitch McConnell. He got really angry and they screwed over veterans. So now they're all huffy about things. So who knows what's going to happen?
It's being spearheaded in the Senate by our own Senator Tammy Baldwin, who is the first openly gay senator.
Yep.
And it has probably the most impact on our other senator, Ron Johnson, who is very vulnerable and up for re-election this year against Mandela Barnes, obviously candidate we prefer greatly to Ron Johnson. He had initially said that he would support it or would found no reason not to vote for it when asked. In an interview, on the record, camera in his face, I don't see any reason not to. Well, recently on a radio interview, he said that he had lied. Just to, quote, get the media off of his back.
We find the quote.
And that he does not support this bill, but he is working on an amendment to the bill to protect religious freedom. So I guess if it's against your religion, you don't have to get gay married? Because, like, that's the only thing I can think of that would protect someone's religious freedom in this context. But does he know that you don't have to get married if you don't want to? Like if I propose to you, Joe, gay marriage is legal, you have to marry me?
I was like, what is this, 2010 now? Like, what are we... We're going back to that crap again?
That's what he said. And yes, he is known as potentially the stupidest senator in the country. It's a toss-up currently between him and Tommy Tuberville. I think they're both hoping that Herschel Walker wins so that there won't be any question who the stupidest one is.
Oh.
But that is what he said. So don't expect his support, I guess, because there's no way that amendment that he is coming up with is going to pass.
Jason, I'm going to be honest, man. I cannot imagine that he would not back this. I know he's trying to do whatever Mitch McConnell tells him to do because he's a really big dumb person. But that would be the dumbest thing that's going to happen this close to a midterm election for him.
Which is why it's important that we have this vote.
Oh, no kidding. I completely agree. But, I mean, we even had the point, I think we talked about Brian Stile, a congressperson who's on the south side of Wisconsin, who's a Republican, very staunch Republican, voted for it because he's in a competitive district. It's the same thing with Johnson. If we get him on the record vocally opposing same-sex marriage,
he's on the record for literally trying to overthrow the votes of every single person in Wisconsin and push a false slate of electors to the vice president.
Yeah, but that's something that most independent voters get lost in the weeds with, where it's, again, for the typical people who are listening to the show, or you and I, or whoever's watching politics or political news all the time, that sounds like it should be the typical thing that should just get him out of office. But the sad reality is, and I'm sure this is why you're probably not seeing a lot of January 6th ads against him, is because the average voter just doesn't care, which really sucks, but that's the truth. However, same-sex marriage is greatly accepted, especially in Wisconsin, and it affects people who are related to those who are LGBTQ. It's becoming much more popular with every single year, and people will be very angry, just like they would be with the Dobbs decision, because its rights being literally taken away by people they know personally.
What it would hopefully do is push some people to vote that wouldn't normally.
I would totally agree.
Which is, that's why they need to do this.
Well, they already pissed off, all the women, so let's throw in the entire LGBTQ community with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing is, as you can see, and we'll put the link in there, you can listen to him say it, he does not support same-sex marriage. He doesn't. He said over and over, well, I was really for civil unions, but, now it's kind of a moot point. It's already done. We don't need to revisit it. We do need to revisit it because Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court justice, said that it should be overturned.
And a fellow senator, Ted Cruz, also agreed with that and said they should also get rid of it.
Who is in a much more leadership position than Ron Johnson is. Mm-hmm. Because they know Ron Johnson is an idiot. They don't give him any authority or power. He is not very well thought of, even though he's been there for 2 full terms. And, he also said that he wasn't going to run for a 3rd term when he was initially elected. But as we know, over and over again, he is a liar. He lied when he was originally asked about this vote. He lied when he was asked multiple times about his role in the fake slate of electors. And he lied about not running for more than 2 terms if he was elected.
And finally, we have to talk about Biden's speech. So, if you guys don't know, Biden gave a speech, and I'm sure you probably didn't know because it got literally no press at all, except for the crazy conservatives and liberals on Twitter who have not stopped talking about it ever since. In the speech, Biden talked about healing the soul of the nation, or fighting for the soul of the nation, and called out explicitly the MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump multiple times, saying they are a threat to our democracy, all while looking like the most Disney villain mofo I've ever seen in my entire life.
It was a very bold choice on the backdrop.
So we have to talk about that first. Who in their right mind thought scary looking red lights with shadowy military personnel in the background was a good idea for a speech about hope and unity?
Apparently he knows about the Dark Brandon thing and likes it. And I feel like they were trying to lean into it.
It was a bad idea. I mean, I like the idea of Dark Brandon. That's fine. If
it's to me, it's cheesy, but
it
whatever.
is cheesy,
and it's like it's not true. That's the other thing.
Well,
is like
sure,
Joe Biden is the most middle of the road moderate Democrat ever.
Milquetoast.
He personally can get a bit ornery when you push him, but his politics are the most. All he talks about is working with Republicans. Reach around my old friend John McCain and I. We used to go out wrestling bears and all of his dumb stories. That's who he is. So the whole Dark Brandon thing was actually started by someone trying to be negative towards Joe Biden, which is funny as it's caught on as like this giant positive thing among the younger folk.
Oh, good.
But yeah, it's ridiculous and the way everyone is freaking out about this speech, it's so stupid. And
it 100% is. I just thought it was absolutely hilarious when I'm hearing things like, we need to come together. We need to make sure, we are a United States of America. I'm not here just for Democrats. I'm here for all Americans. And he looks so like he's about to commit a genocide any second. And I was so concerned. Like I was hearing lines like he's like starting to get ramped up. He's like trying to pep himself up while he's going and saying like, and this is why we need to do this. And here's this and here's this and here's this and here's this. And I'm just waiting for the line of, and this is why today ... And he said that. And I'm like, oh no. And I was like,
no one leaves.
I was like, and this is why I will exterminate all of the MAGA Republicans. Mwah! Like, oh no. So it was very weird of a speech. Like I liked the speech. I didn't disagree with any of the speech. I thought it was fine. It just definitely got overshadowed by the fact that he looked so damn evil.
And he equivocated at every turn. It's not every Republican. It's Donald Trump's cult, essentially.
Yes. So let me ask you this. How did you feel about that? Did that annoy you, frustrate you, upset you? Did you like that he was doing that, calling out specifically MAGA Republicans, not Republicans?
Well, it didn't do him any good, did it? They all reacted, and they literally all said he's attacking every Republican.
Yep, I totally agree with that. My guess is that, and I'm not defending by any means, my guess, honestly, with this whole speech is that he knows or greatly expects something's really about to go down with the whole FBI investigation into Trump. I think that's legitimately what it is. I think, even though obviously they've been delayed right now because of the special master and that stupid decision.
I don't even care.
Yeah,
because nothing's happened yet. Well,
but I think obviously he's been in talks with the DOJ and he's trying to prepare the country for something crazy to happen. And he's trying to say, hey, we're all Americans here. Don't be like Trump.
Who will be in jail, hopefully.
Right.
I wish that were true.
And I think he's trying to avoid a literal civil war. That is my honest take.
I think he's about a year and 8 months too late for that.
Well, I get that too. But I think that was kind of the whole purpose of that speech. I think that's why he specifically called out the tribalism of the MAGA Republicans and said, hey, I love all Republicans that I always work with. And it's annoying as hell from our progressive side to hear him say that because, I mean, and I'm sure he knows this as well, or maybe not, who knows him, but I'm sure people at the White House at least know that the majority of Republicans today are the MAGA Republicans.
It's certainly the driving force in their
Yes,
party.
and I think he was intentionally being facetious just to play to that idea of like, no, they're still good, even though I know they're all assholes, but they're still good because I don't want you to go up in arms when Trump gets arrested.
Well, I think he honestly believes that though, because he's been saying that nonstop.
No, I think him personally, he believes that. I think as far as people in the White House goes,
whoever wrote the speech,
I bet they're being more. I bet they're being more strategic.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't hate it. I really didn't think it did him any favors because,
right. I mean, that's at the end of the day that equivocating doesn't help you.
Right. Although I will say, for a short little bit, I did see a little bit of energy coming from left influencers or progressive and Democratic influencers that were probably annoyed, thinking that he wasn't going to do anything, or at least even call out the problem for what it was. At least it may have also motivated them because now Biden officially called the problem for at least what it was.
Mm. I mean, literally, they just had, like 2 weeks prior to this speech, they had their convention where they put up
a literal fascist,
a banner, a scroll that said, "We are all domestic terrorists." and everyone cheered in the crowd. And now when they're being called kind of fashy by the president, they're screaming about it. How dare you label us as anti-democracy fascists?
Fascist says what? That kind of is a nice little segue into our main segment, I think, because that's exactly what happened.
Yes, that dovetails quite nicely of a group that certainly is composed partially of people who are guilty of the thing that the group is being painted with, being rather offended when you point that out.
Yep.
So let's talk about Gamergate.
To the main segment.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
Discussions on extremism, YouTube rabbit holes, racism, sexism, and the alt-right are common today. But many still don't understand where this massive movement in this direction came from. In fact, looking back on it today, the signs were rather painfully obvious. The problem was it was happening on the internet, and internet culture is something the vast majority of people know very little about. So let's look back a decade, look at the internet culture of the day, and see how a relatively unknown event, now infamously known as Gamergate, generated a massive movement of resentment among predominantly young white men. And I thought, Jason, the best way I wanted to start this off was our own personal experiences. So I was very close to getting involved with this movement. For me, it was the early 2010s. I was in college, or I was starting out in college, so like 2010 to 2014, that's when I was going. I was dealing with the cult that I was a part of at the time, so I had all that stuff and resentment going, a little chip on my shoulder. And I found the Atheist and Skeptic creators on YouTube. I first started with Seth Andrews of The Thinking Atheist. I found The Amazing Atheist. I don't know his real name. I don't honestly care. Dark Matter 2525, Non-Stamp Collector Logic, Thunderfoot. And it was all about these amazing things of dealing with philosophical arguments about religion, talking about science, evolution, and creationism, and like debunking idiotic theories on creationism. And it was really good stuff overall. And it was all about being rational and reasonable and following logic to its logical conclusion. For me at the time, it was all during the height of the moral panic around political correctness. And for those of you who don't know, political correctness is literally just what we consider wokeism or woke today. It's the exact same thing, just with a different label. So at the time, I actually described myself as anti-PC, where I like, all these people are making the white people shut up and they can't say the things they really want to say. And, we are the true majority and all that kind of nonsense. I was actually a pretty conservative dude back in the day. Yeah, it was pretty rough. But yeah, I was a strong proponent of the anti-PC crowd. And I took offense to literally everything that you would expect a young white male to take offense to. And while I was at the height of like my atheist phase, or the angry atheist phase, while I was still getting into this and finding myself, a lot of these channels that I was looking at, what used to be videos on science and religion, became places to attack feminism and social justice. Creationist debunking videos became feminist fail compilations, feminist debunking videos. I remember one video from, I think it was The Amazing Atheist, it's only sexist with men do it. And it was just him ranting into the camera about how there's a double standard, like men can't get away with anything these days. They're always considered sexist. I never really got into them per se, but I saw that they're becoming more prevalent to the point where actually I was getting annoyed. I remember with Thunderfoot was a big problem with this, because I loved him for his science videos. And
I still his like debunking Kickstarters.
Right.
Stuff. It's good. Yeah, he's a complete tool, and I wouldn't want to listen to him now, but
he's still going, by the way. He's going pretty strong. I actually had to check him for this podcast because I want to see if he was still actually has a YouTube channel. He's still going pretty strong. And I saw like a 10-year like looking back on his YouTube career thing, and it's literally just him saying, yeah, the feminists tried to cancel me, and then he just sticks to science stuff now. I don't see any feminism things, so whatever. At least he's sticking to science at least. But I remember specifically with him where I would love watching his science videos and him debunking creationist arguments videos, and it just slowly became all feminist stuff all the time. And it was always the same like clips and faces that you would see with feminism all the time. It was like the red-haired or the purple-haired women who are just screaming and shouting and yelling patriarchy all day long, where we could just point and laugh at them and call them stupid.
Although you do realize that's exactly what they do on the atheist side too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There was 100% all the irony was lost. A logic, right? But among all of this new anti-SJW or social justice warrior and anti-feminist and anti-women content, there was this thing called Gamergate. And I actually knew very little about it. I heard, and we'll talk about her in a second, I knew about Anita Sarkeesian, and I saw all the bashing towards her, and that was about it. I also knew that men were just angry because feminists tried to say that video games were sexist, and that was it. I just didn't know anymore. So overall, I actually knew very little until I actually looked into Gamergate today, and I was very surprised about how bad it actually was. So that's kind of my perspective. I'm curious about yours,
Sure.
Jason.
It's funny to hear you say that you were nearly involved. Had Gamergate happened about 5 years earlier, I almost certainly would have been part of it.
You think so?
Yeah, I would probably reluctantly take on the label of gamer. I've always played video games my entire life. It's still a big hobby of mine. I mostly PC versus console, I think, is more of the extremists. I played competitively online in a Counter-Strike league before atheism and skepticism became like where I found community. It was in gaming, and not like extremists like we have with Gamergate. Nobody that I played with, I don't think, would have fallen into that category, but that's where I spent most of my time, was online playing games, and I could certainly have seen myself feeling attacked by what happened. But as it turned out, because of the timeline and when it came around in 2014, that I was already kind of inoculated against that like anti-feminist, anti-PC, I guess you could say woke. I'd never heard anyone use that term at that point.
Actually, back then, that was kind of when progressives were the ones actually using that sincerely before it became like a pejorative.
But I was already kind of aware of that. I think we mentioned this on a much earlier episode. I won't really get into it, but in 2011, there was Elevator Gate, because everything's got to be named Gate. We're all very, very creative.
Which, I mean, maybe it's always so pedantic to point this out as well, but the whole idea of also naming everything like scandal-wise something Gate is also incorrect.
Right. The name of the hotel was the Watergate. Yeah, it wasn't about water. Yeah. But yeah, and so I don't know why that tendency is there either, but so in 2011, there was the same schism in the atheist community, skeptic community, around the role of feminism and social justice within the larger atheist community. It spawned the much ridiculed Atheism Plus, if you remember. And I was very much on the side of the feminists in that fight. It had to do with Rebecca Watson from Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, still one of my favorite podcasts. And I was more of a podcast listener than not really YouTube, although I watch more YouTube now. But so I really wasn't into many of the, like you mentioned, TJ Kirk and all those people. Yes. I was listening to Seth Andrews on his podcast, but I was not really watching many of those who turned into reactionaries on YouTube. So I heard the whole story from the person that it actually happened to. And
see, and I was the opposite with that. I heard the story from the other end.
So I sided with, Rebecca Watson in that case, who I knew, and, all of those attacks against her, which were ridiculous. And so I was already kind of on that side. And then right after that came the Anita Sarkeesian thing. She created a YouTube channel, Feminist Frequency, and she was doing a Kickstarter in 2012, Tropes versus Women in Video Games.
Which I've actually thought about. I should probably look back at that video series again. Now that I have a different view, I couldn't stand that series. I actually tried to hate watch that series. I wonder if I'd actually enjoy that series now.
Certainly probably have a different perspective.
Yeah.
And it had a goal of $6,000, and she had raised $158,922.
My God, wasn't this just for a YouTube series?
Yes.
Jesus.
A series of video essays about sexism in video games.
I don't think they're really that crazily produced either to require that much money.
And it was, again, something that I did not see where the negativity was coming from. Right? You tell me, video games are sexist. Yes, I've played I've played a lot of video games.
But Jason, Samus.
Right. Metroid, where you don't know,
dude.
Where it's like the reveal at the very end after you beat the game.
Lara Croft, have you heard of her?
Right, yeah. Huh? Lara Croft is not sexist at all.
I mean, Princess Zelda turns into Sheik, I guess, but it's still Princess Zelda, all right?
The object to be rescued. Yeah, I would totally relate with someone saying, yeah, video games are really sexist. They're mostly aimed towards men, and it has an alienating effect on women. And if you want to have women be part of your market, they're half the population, you should maybe look at
things women want to play.
Right, and creating things that feels more inclusive to them. That is totally reasonable to me, and I never understood the hate that she took for that. And I had arguments with people that we used to have a community with, which we no longer do because of their extreme conservative views these days.
Well, because they literally fell into this exact same rabbit hole.
Right, and it was on this subject. So I was very much already on one side before we got to Gamergate. And I will say, much like you, I didn't pay that much attention to it because it was so online. Like, you didn't really hear that much about Gamergate unless you went out of your way.
I mean, this was also during when a lot of people just were not using social media like they are today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I still remember when back in that time, people were promoting Twitter, like oh, so-and-so celebrity or athlete has Twitter now. Whoa. And then I would never care because I'm like, no one goes on Twitter.
Right. And I'm still not that online.
No,
to that extent that, you know, a lot of these people were.
Right.
They're spending their entire day on these message boards.
Well, we'll talk about that as well.
And I was at one point when I was, like I said, when I was in competitive gaming and with a group of friends, I spent most days on IRC chatting with them. And that's, you know, that is where a lot of this stuff took place, but it's kind of sectioned off. You have your own rooms.
What is IRC for listeners?
Internet relay chat. It's just a text-based chat interface that, yeah, again, you have to be, there's not only are there different servers everywhere, which could isolate you from anyone else, there's also different rooms. So unless you're going into the rooms with these people talking about Gamergate or wherever, you know, they were, you're not going to find them accidentally. You have to know kind of how to find them or what you're looking for. So I don't think I would have accidentally stumbled upon this, but had this started around the time that I was really into gaming and really doing that for my main hobby and really taking up way too much time, you can ask my wife, I would have likely, you know, fallen into this to at least some extent, especially the way it was, and we'll talk about it, but the way it was pushed to kind of the gaming mainstream of like, they're calling you all, you know, sexist, misogynist, racists, and, you know, they don't want you to be part of the community. They want it all to be other people. And that's the way a lot of people still see it today.
Well, then let's get into what Gamergate actually was. So what I could tell is that it all started with two things: a small indie video game and a blog post. The video game was actually created by Zoe Quinn, who now has come out as non-binary, so they use they, them pronouns. And they created a game called Depression Quest. Now at the time, and this sounds almost a little crazy to most gamers today, or especially indie gamers today, this was more of an artistic style of game that's meant to teach a lesson and perspective about depression. It was a text-based adventure style game, I guess you could say, where
I mean, I guess I grew up in a time where text-based games were still popular, so to me it's not that crazy.
No, sorry, let me rephrase. Let me clarify. This was during the time where it was supposed to be more about entertainment and enjoyment value as opposed to artistic elements and like real hard-hitting subject matter, where nowadays you're hitting a lot of stuff into like mental health stuff. You're seeing video games made about literally anything today, where back in the day there was a lot of pushback for something like that because this was kind of one of the first of its kind to talk about something that was so morbid and literally depressing.
And Zoe did receive a lot of harassment even before the blog post you're going to talk about. So they were already a target.
Yes.
To a growing group of people.
Yes. So Depression Quest comes out on Steam. It's for free or basically pay whatever you want. And the entire proceeds go to, I think it was a charity deal with like suicide prevention or something like that. Sounds pretty mundane, right? Well, reviews came out. It got tons of great reviews. It was super awesome. It was super unique and niche and whatever you want to say. And people were very upset that the game was not fun or enjoyable and is as morbid as it was. And because of that, they thought that something was wrong with the review process because they thought that this game did not deserve as rave reviews as they thought it should have received. That gets to Zoe's, at the time, boyfriend. I don't remember his name and I don't care.
Yeah, we're not going to say his name.
Don't even care. Who decided to write a
extremely
literally
long,
like a novella.
Yes.
level of length in a blog post that talked about how they had a very rough relationship for about, I think it was like 6 months, where Zoe may have cheated on people or cheated on him with people. And it seemed like it was a toxic relationship.
Yeah. And they both seemed very immature and not really the type of people who should have been in a relationship at that time.
Right. And we're not going to talk about like, was this true or not? Because that's not the point of this.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, I can totally foresee, it's plausible that people are in toxic relationships all the time. However, the big thing about this random blog post was that, which is now dawned as the Zoe post or the Zoe blog, I can't remember what it was called.
Zoe post.
Thank you. It accused Zoe of cheating on her boyfriend with people, especially game journalists or gaming journalists.
One specifically
Gaming
journalist
to get better reviews of Depression Quest.
It was an otaku journalist who had never actually reviewed the game, nor had anyone at Otaku. But that's completely ignored or just papered over in all of this, is that the main accusation behind all of this, and where it picked up this fake veneer of ethics in game journalism, was based on a lie. Something provably to be false, even though there are those that will tell you Otaku just removed the review, which on the internet, like just to think of something that could have been removed by a company and hidden forever is laughable. It never works. But according to some defenders of Gamergate, that must be what they did. Otherwise, why would they sleep with someone?
And now you're probably getting the picture of why this may be a big deal. Today, conspiracy theories and misinformation and disinformation is commonplace discourse. Back then, that wasn't necessarily the case, but you're seeing a lot of the same themes and attitudes that are being portrayed back then as you do today. It's a lot of people, mostly men, who were swept up in a conspiracy based on a sexist lie that someone had to have sexual relations with someone to have good reviews of a product they made. Now, like I said before, at least in my own personal experience, this was during the anti-PC craze. This was during the anti-feminist craze. Poorly timed, this is when Anita Sarkeesian comes in with her aforementioned tropes of, Tropes versus Women series for Kickstarter.
Tropes versus Women in video game. The Kickstarter was a little bit before this, but I believe
series came out.
The series, yeah.
Yes. And
she had already been a target forever just for her feminist critiques of culture.
Right. She gets lumped into Gamergate, not because she had anything to do with Gamergate, but she was just another feminist person.
Well, and as we talked about, these people were already harassing women in gaming and in popular culture before this. This was just an excuse to get people into their cause and to get more people on board, because you had this prominent post that was going everywhere, and they could use that controversy to say, yes, you need to join in our crusade to try to take our hobby back from these SJWs that are coming into our space and trying to dictate to us what our hobby is. And they're trying to remove us from our space, and they're trying to replace us with diversity, and we're all sexist misogynists. And what happened after this campaign got rolling, and it was attacking, the same people that were already attacking Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn. There was two other main figures that were being attacked. Lee Alexander, who was a Gamasutra journalist and editor. She wrote an article titled "Gamers Don't Have to Be Your Audience. Gamers Are Over."
This goes back on that same identity idea.
Right, and and there were a lot of other articles that came out at the time as a response to what was going on, like saying we do need to distance ourselves from this crazy sexist mob. And this was one of those articles. And it's what we talked about before. Hey, women are half the population. Let's try to make games for everyone instead of just keep making games for a specific, white straight men between the ages of 18 and 34, which is the way games were made and marketed previously. And that was being used as, they're coming for us. They're coming for our games. They're not real gamers. That was pushed on Anita Sarkeesian constantly. That, she's just in it for the money. She's just in it for the notoriety. And she's going to ruin video games because of it. So that kind of attitude, or that rallying cry, guy brought in a much wider group of people that were involved in this. And they even, like, there's chat logs, there's all of this evidence that the idea of it being ethics in video game journalism
It's nonsense.
is something that was constructed, that was come up with as, like, we
defense.
need to come up with a reason.
Well, and I think we need to clarify that a little, because weirdly enough, I think we skipped over one of those vital parts of this entire thing, which was a nearly global harassment campaign that was launched against these women.
Right.
Death threats, rape threats. People were
Brianna Wu was the fourth, like, major target here. She's the co-founder of indie game developer Giant Space Cat. She's also a very outspoken activist for women in programming and gaming specifically. And those four, I've got a list of a bunch more. Every time I looked into this, I could have added 3 or 4 more names, and they're all women.
Well, because it was just literally every single person that was tied to this was attached to the mob. So it got so bad for many people, especially women, like Zoe, Anita, Leia, and Brianna. Lee, sorry, thank you. They had to move. I believe they all had to move from their houses because the threats were getting too real, and that they were legitimately worried that people were posting up outside of their houses, waiting for them to step outside so they could shoot them in the face with a shotgun.
They were getting this is where we all learned the term doxing from.
Yes.
Is their personal information, their address, the name of their families, the name of their children.
Well, and that was the biggest problem, right? It wasn't just the people who were being targeted. It was everyone associated with those targets.
Yeah, all of that information was being posted online. They were getting sent pictures of them out in public, like showing that, oh, I know where you are. I'm close enough to take this picture of you. This stuff that the mob does.
Yep.
That's what was happening with this group of people that just want to talk about ethics in video game journalism. So that cover story, that smoke screen, it's all about ethics in video game journalism. We're concerned that Zoe Quinn was able to have a romantic relationship with a video game journalist that compromises his reporting on her, even though, again, he never reviewed any of her games. Or even, I think there's one article that everyone points to, which comes from before they were in a relationship, and was just talking about a failed reality show that she was a part of that never even happened. So there's nothing to sell, there's no way to anyone to make money, but just talking about the experience of that failed.
Well, and this is why it's such a good example of a conspiracy theory, is because it doesn't matter how the peg fits, whether it's a square peg in a round hole, as long as something gets shaved off in any way and you make it fit somehow with enough force, it'll fit. And that was exactly the big problem with that, where it was them saying that, well, just having them talk at all was confirmation that there was all these problems in gaming journalism, where in actuality, it was absolutely not related to this whatsoever. But based on motivated reasoning and their desire to have this conspiracy be true, that was more than enough for them to confirm their conspiracy theory.
And the thing is, there are honest problems in video game journalism. There was an issue in 2014, at the same time this was happening, that was reported pretty widely about game developers paying YouTubers to do reviews on their games. There has always been the issue of the major game publishers.
I was literally just going to say that.
Being the primary advertisers for all of these sites, and before them, all of the magazines. So you're financially incentivized to give them good reviews, or they're not going to give you advertising money, which is the only way you exist in the first place. So they literally control you. It's how our politics works. It's how journalism in sports works too.
But keep in mind how those were not
right. Well,
on the radar.
Yeah, because it didn't have anything to do with
feminism
and yeah, people of color and
at the end of the day, it was changing their lives.
Right, people who they felt were trying to replace them.
Yeah. Again, shocker. Does this sound familiar anywhere? So, and then while as this kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it started attracting more popular people, and you may recognize some of these people. Milo Yiannopoulos is a good one to start with.
He was writing as the tech writer for Breitbart. At the time, Breitbart, very unknown digital site. Milo Yiannopoulos, very unknown writer at the time. He gained his popularity and started his career by covering Gamergate. Who was the person that brought him in to Breitbart? Of course, everyone's favorite pumpkin that's been left out in the sun for too long, Steve Bannon. We have a direct quote from Steve Bannon. "I realized Milo could connect with these kids right away. You can activate that army. They come in through Gamergate or whatever, and they get turned onto politics and Trump." I don't think there's a better quote to show the relationship between what started in this nonsense in a niche corner of the internet and our current politics, and why there were so many people online rooting for Trump for some unknown reason.
Well, and we'll actually get into this. I'm glad you found that quote because it's going to the exact same topic that I would go into a little bit later, where how this was actually manufactured outrage, again, intentionally designed by people like Bannon to anger a large majority of people to get into politics and have a resentful-based, like, political mindset. But we'll get in that a little bit. Other people that got super into the whole Gamergate thing were Christina Hoff Sommers. She was kind of part of the intellectual dark web movement for a little while. I don't even know what she's doing anymore. But she's basically like the men's rights activists, like feminist of choice. I don't know, the feminist who hates women or something.
She was a GOP consultant. Something. She was
a very anti-woman woman, basically. I mean, a lot of Gamergate also had to deal with finding token people. Again, where do you hear this before? Whether it was people of color, women, whatever it may be, and then
some of which they manufactured.
I would say literally created and paid to go do these types of videos and responses to Gamergate.
The hashtag #NotYourShield was a concerted effort every time it was brought up that this movement is hugely racist and sexist. They would parade out one of these accounts that they either made or maybe they found someone that would be useful in this role to say, "I'm part of Gamergate and I am not your shield." And they would use Gamergate as a hashtag, not your shield as a hashtag. They literally had all of this laid out. Again, there are these transcripts that were captured from these sites because obviously, much like all of these militia groups who are filled with FBI informants, all of these Gamergate groups were also filled with people reporting on them. So all of this evidence exists, but yet the people that are still supporters just ignore it.
And of course, we have Mike Cernovich, who is an alt-right personality who got a big-time start on Alex Jones's InfoWars.
Yeah, that guy is a real... Even in this company, that guy is a bit of a nutcase.
And this thing just kept spiraling more and more out of control. It became less about being about conservative values or whatever it may be. It was all about resentment, and it made a lot of people, even people who are very mainstream celebrities, get involved.
You had the person that actually came up with the term Gamergate, which, I mean, as we talked about, that like putting gate at the end of everything is not exactly an accomplishment.
Yeah.
But Adam Baldwin, who is, I remember him more from Full Metal Jacket as Animal Mother, who apparently he wasn't acting in that part, but also I guess was in Firefly, which I have never seen. But he was one of the celebrity leaders of this movement. And he's the one who first used that hashtag Gamergate. So they were very good in this outreach, very Scientology-esque in their outreach to celebrities and mainstream figures.
So, and that's the situation of what Gamergate is in a nutshell. There is so much more detail you can go into this. We'll include some really great resources that really dive deep into all of those types of details. But just for sake of time, we're going to kind of stop it there.
Yeah, so if you need to know what it is, and really quick, it was, as Joe said, an organized harassment campaign meant to push women out of the video game industry that was veiled in this fake, it's about ethics in video game journalism. Well, it did accomplish the first thing and did nothing to combat the second. So if you're one of the people that really truly believes it was about ethics in video game journalism, you have to ask yourself what it actually accomplished.
Right.
For that goal. It sure harassed a lot of women and made a lot of women quit their jobs and find another industry to work in, but it really didn't do anything about the ethics of video game journalism.
So, but what I want to talk about now is some of the research that I found about Gamergate, and in particular, 2 journal articles that I'll link in the show notes. One is actually someone that did an analysis or a text analysis of the discourse that was done by Gamergaters to observe the general theme memes and messaging that was done by the community. From the article, I discovered that hashtag Gamergate discussions which focus on gender rely on 3 particular rhetorical figures and storytelling strategies. Number 1, crusader imagery. Number 2, disciplining unruly female voices. And number 3, claims that, quote, real, that is male, gamers are the actual victims of Gamergate. So let's get into what those actually mean. Let's start with crusader imagery. Referencing a YouTube video, the article says, the video envisions hashtag Gamergate as a battle between forces of darkness and light, in which Gamergaters fight to preserve the purity and goodness of games. Gamergaters' references to war create a, quote, narrative framing to set themselves up as the good guys on the quest for the truth, which I think is something that's very relatable to a lot of, we'll say, religious movements and very conservative style movements, where it's not about actually learning about anything when it comes to the issues. It's about a moral panic. This is literally a part of a moral panic that has very little substance to it, but it's all based on emotion and fear. Would you agree with that, Jason?
Yeah, it was a reactionary mob.
Correct. Number 2, disciplining female voices. The article goes on to say, Gamergaters relied on an exclusionary logic that is central to social media as a toxic technoculture that often relies on othering of those perceived as outside the culture. A war game needs enemies to defeat, and hashtag Gamergate has a range of strategies for discrediting its detractors. Some of these directly invoke past wartime propaganda. Gamergaters have repurposed Nazi-era anti-Semitism, going after Sarkeesian on Twitter with slurs like Jewkeesian, and that's very mundane compared to some of the stuff that was out there. Again, not going to go into all the stuff.
It was very much a gatekeeping ideology.
Right. It was more about being edgy. It was more about keeping people down as opposed to finding truth to the actual matter.
Women are allowed in our community only if it's on our terms.
Yes.
And they literally created their own version of what, like, the women that they want in gaming. They created a mascot for Gamergate.
Yes.
Called Vivian James, like video games, who was a redheaded, green-eyed teenage gamer girl. Like, very conventionally feminine, attractive. They basically made Jean Grey, but played video games. And they wanted to use that as like, see, we're not sexist. We made a woman
as our mascot.
I was like... like weird science. Like, look, we made a woman. We're not sexist. It's the stupidest, and any reasonable person that would look at that would know exactly what's going on. That it's so stupid. They just want to let people in only if they get to decide who's there. And not only just decide, but we will make our own to tell you, like, this is the women that we want in video games. That doesn't care when we yell at her about being out of the kitchen and tell her that she sucks and needs to just go make babies, that she just, you know, plays along and doesn't think we're being mean or sexist.
Well, and
that's the type of gamer that
I think there's a lot similar to the religious right of those same expectations of women, because you'll see a lot of women who are in the religious conservative right who are very anti-women.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll
Tradcon.
say, right. And they'll say, like, you know, a woman's place is in the kitchen or in the home. They will openly discredit them themselves because they feel like they are inferior to male counterparts. Right. So, and that's because
we reported on that that women's convention that Charlie Kirk was
right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. You have to marry to have value type of stuff. So it has a lot of those same similarities and parallels. And then finally, in the article number 3, gamers are the real victims. Gamergaters see themselves as besieged by SJWs whose critiques are personal and political, and part of an insidious plot to destroy gaming entirely. Gamergaters refuse to stand by idly while the emphasis in gaming is taken away from quality and focus on social politics. Quote, ideology or quote, politics is always the label given to what someone else cares about, though. SJWs are always talking about ideology while real gamers are about talking about games. And I think this was a very, very telling part of the article for me, because that's what we do. Psychology research usually goes into how we are much less forgiving of other people than we are of our own selves. And we are even less forgiving of people that are outside of our particular social group than we are of ourselves. So that makes a lot of sense to me, that when it comes to, and you'll see this all, especially in politics all the time, when someone does a political strategy or they play a political hardball, they do an attack ad or something like that, they're doing something wrong. But then when your side does it, well, you're just standing up for the truth. truth or you're standing up for the real values or whatever it may be. We will constantly justify everything our own social group does or the people we care about do because that's what we're trained to do by evolutionary biology. The article continues, in seeing themselves as the real victims, gamergaters assume moral superiority. Their aggressive and misogynistic claims circulate on social media as an expression of this position, quote, disguising hate as a moral campaign against a perceived immoral threat. And we kind of talked about that earlier. Another study that I found titled Who Are Gamergate, a descriptive study of individuals involved in the Gamergate controversy. I actually saw this being used in defense of Gamergaters, by the way, Jason. So this was very interesting. And the way the study was done was they found people from back in that time. This was actually done several years ago when it was still relevant. And they tried to figure out who was what. Like, was this all male, white male conservative people, or was it more diverse than that? Well, we have actually a demographic breakdown of it where, unsurprisingly, gender, it was about 89 to 90% male and about 10 to 11% female. So obviously the vast majority was male. 3/4 of it was heterosexual, which also seems unsurprising to me. 74.5% was white or Caucasian. The second most was multiracial at 10.5%, and the rest were in the very low single digits. And then I think what was the most interesting about this study was the political views. You had liberal at 35%, slightly liberal at 19 to 20%, or 19.6%, moderate at 23.6%, and then all the rest were kind of in like the slightly conservative, extreme conservatives, conservative, and extreme liberal were all in the mid single digits.
Mm-hmm. I think the way I heard it coming from the Breitbart angle and the Bannon article that I read was they thought of these people as the perfect vessels coming in because they were generally non-political.
Yes, and that's where I think the defense of this study gets it wrong, because the study is then to say, like, well, technically, actually, these people were mostly liberal. This was not a conservative-led movement. However, this is what we're actually seeing back at the time, where there's a difference between people who actually have legitimate conservative views versus they are non or apolitical, but they still have the same resentment as many conservative people do have, which is what I'm assuming you were trying to go for.
Right, that most of these people that were coming in had never really thought about politics or had politics brought to them.
Well, and for them, this wasn't political.
And I would guess for most young people, they would describe themselves as liberal.
Yep.
That's fairly normal unless you're raised in a conservative household where politics is kind of preached to you or made an issue by someone else externally. You're really not going to think much about it. So that's what that quote from Steve Bannon is saying is we got these people that were already all riled up about an issue and angry and looking for a fight, and we pushed them into conservative politics and to Donald Trump.
I completely agree. And the one thing that I did want to critique this study with, it was just for my own personal education on this type of stuff, is do not trust just self-described demographics when it comes to politics like this. People lie all the time, and even more so, people are completely unknowing of what their political identity is. When you survey like specific issues versus identities, they get you very different results most of the time because people just don't know about politics, and that's okay, but you have to be aware of that. So by saying that Gamergate was a liberal movement doesn't actually say much unless we actually know what the real politics of the issues those people were. To counteract that, a lot of studies actually do a political knowledge test to see like if they're actually politically knowledgeable or not, and then that gets statistically compared to the survey results, but this didn't do that.
Well, and also, as we were talking about, Milo Yiannopoulos, conservative. Mike Cernovich, conservative.
Christina Hoff Sommers was a literal Republican.
Right. The Adam Baldwin describes himself as a conservative libertarian. Right. So the leaders of this movement are all conservative.
I liked the video that you sent me about this, Jason, which talked about the leaders of the Gamergate movement, because the whole point of Gamergate, the only way I can describe it is almost like BLM, which was a very ground up based movement that did not have any actual leadership per se, but can still have influential leaders, or at least influential people leading the movement. What are your thoughts on something like that was in the video that you sent me?
So in that video, they say that, yeah, according to everyone, they don't have any leaders. They're all like individual cells individuals.
But they all congregate around
And they
like
all
5 people.
had followed at least 2 of those 5 people.
Yes.
All of them. Or it was like something like 93%.
It was like 98.
Right. So they can say they don't have leaders, but there were definitely people pushing the narrative and people that everyone repeats. You see it today. Like, okay, the conservative movement outside of politics, right? Who is the leader of the Republican Party right now is obviously Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell. But you have people like...
Sorry, I thought it was Joe Biden because they're all the same to me.
But you have people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder and Dave Rubin, who all of these people listen to and parrot. We know a few of them, and that's who they go to for their opinions.
Yes.
So while anyone looking from the outside wouldn't necessarily say those are the leaders of the party, they very much are.
Well, and if anything, they're definitely influential. That's the big part about it. So now,
and people like Tucker Carlson.
I completely agree. So now I want to go back to Steve Bannon. You had that great quote about how he can weaponize the gaming community. I have more on that, by the way. There was an Atlantic article by Jennifer Senior where she did multiple interviews with him and discussed what different motivations he had. And I had one, which is weirdly enough, actually not one of the interviews that she did, but she was referencing another interview from a different documentary that was made in 2018 about Steve Bannon. And I just want to read this to you and see what you think about this, Jason. Bannon is recalling his Hong Kong days in the 2000s when he was working for Internet Gaming Company, or IGE. He notes how...
which was, by the way, a Chinese gold farming company for World of Warcraft.
There we go.
Run by a former child actor who is now a crypto bro.
There you go. He notes how stunned he was to discover how many people played multiplayer online games and how intensely they played them. But then he breaks it down for Morris, the guy who is doing the interview for his documentary, using the example of a theoretical man named Dave in accounts payable who one day drops dead. This is a quote from Steve Bannon. Some preacher from a church or some guy from a funeral home who's never met him does a 10-minute eulogy, says a few prayers, Bannon says, and that's Dave. But that's offline Dave. Online Dave is a whole other story. Dave in the game is Ajax, Bannon continues, and Ajax is like the man. Ajax gets a, is it Kaizen?
Kazan? I have no idea.
I am sorry.
I've not heard that term. I don't think it's a gaming term. I don't know what that is.
Gets a Kaizen when he dies and is carried off to a raging funeral pyre. The rival group comes out and attacks. There's literally thousands of people there, Bannon says. People are home playing the game, and guys are not going to work, and women are not going to work because it's Ajax. Now, who's more real, Bannon asked? Dave in accounting or Ajax?
And this is the most made up story.
Oh, obviously.
I've played in plenty of MMOs.
You don't think there's thousands of people coming to a funeral?
I've never seen
World of Warcraft?
an in-game funeral for someone in World of Warcraft. How would that work? Are they going to animate a dead person in the game? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
But I do think the example shows how people are so tied to their virtual identities. And there's so many people that are willing to take this as seriously as possible. And actually later down the road, this same author says this is exactly what happened in January 6th, where they stormed the Capitol not as themselves, but as their virtual identities in the MAGA movement.
Their military LARP persona.
Basically.
Yeah.
But like we kind of talked about earlier, this became the focus when Bannon took over Breitbart in 2012. Another quote from him saying, "The key to these sites was the comment section of Breitbart. This could be weaponized at some point in time. The angry voices, properly directed, have latent political power."
And, you know, and I mentioned that IGE was a gold farming company, and it failed because enough of the community got so sick of what was going on and having, you know, all of this currency, like in-game currency, gold out of the game, being sold in real life, being sold for cash, that it flooded the fake economy in the game. And, you know, people would be playing for hours and hours and days, and they would be constantly losing, you know, bids or having prices being jacked up by these people that were just buying all of this currency, and they felt it was cheating. And they fought an organized campaign to get the attention of Blizzard, who actually had to do something to shut this down. So Bannon saw that and saw this organization, this groundswell of support to actually push a $1 billion company to take action against its own customers.
Yep.
in these Chinese gold farmers who had, thousands of accounts so that they could do this. That effort and that willingness to spend the time and energy to organize and fight, and that kind of focused, concerted effort is what amazed him and made him feel like, okay, we need to do something to harness this energy because it's real and it exists. And when these gamers get really motivated about something, they are able to make changes.
Well, and it consumes them as well. That's their big thing. And there is an article from the New York Times in here that I'll include called The Making of a YouTube Radical. I won't go into it, but it's a really good personal story of an individual guy who gets more radicalized into alt-right extremism through YouTube. It's really nice. But that's actually what I want to talk about next, which is literally the moving of the Overton window through YouTube and online platforms. Early in the 2010s, even up until today, you see YouTubers who portray themselves as motivational speakers and self-help gurus who fill the heads of many disaffected, especially white men, with extremist propaganda. I'm talking about people like Jordan Peterson. We've talked about him earlier in previous episodes. Stephen Molyneux, who you
Stefan,
I don't care. He's a terrible person.
He is horrible. He's a avowed white nationalist.
And fun fact, he's actually the main guy that radicalizes the main character of The Making of a YouTube Radical NYT article I just told you about, where these people try to get them to find meaning through like these types of self-help videos that these people make. And what they'll end up doing is, while providing a community and a sense of self-worth, they'll also just inundate them with all these horrible, misogynistic, and alpha male nonsense that makes them horrible, toxic people. Meanwhile, there's also a bunch of rationalist YouTubers that are describing themselves as being liberal while espousing right-wing rhetoric. You already mentioned Dave Rubin, who I think is legitimately a grifter. I mean, you can't necessarily say that about the other people that I'm talking about, but I think Dave Rubin's probably like the best one you can make an argument for, where he says, the whole I didn't leave the left left me type of stuff. There's also Tim Pool, who's one of the most known as well as viewed people on YouTube by conservatives and Republicans. You also have Sargon of Akkad, who described themselves as a liberal or at least somewhat moderate.
Didn't he actually run for political office as like basically the UK equivalent of a conservative though?
No, it was much worse. It was like the UK equivalent.
Well, like a Nazi, but that is like the equivalent to the conservatives here.
No, I think it was actually even closer.
It was
to
UKIP. It was
but I thought they were even more closer related to like the MAGA movement of today.
Yeah,
it was like if the MAGA movement today. Okay, well, I guess they're Republicans then.
Yeah,
fine, whatever.
But yes, so someone who describes himself as a liberal but literally runs as a right-winger for political office.
Now, why did that happen, or how is that even possible? That sounds crazy to you, I'm assuming. It's because it doesn't matter what they stand for, it's what they stand against. This whole thing and this whole movement is all about resentment. Gamergate was all about not staying for anything, like Jason talked about very explicitly. There was no purpose for finding better ethics in gaming journalism. It was all about resenting other people trying to take things or replacing what they already like. And of course, YouTube's algorithm made this so much worse by recommending similar and more extreme content. I included an article, I'm sure you probably saw this before, Jason, about the alternative network of radicalization. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So there's a very cool Guardian article I'll post in here. It did receive a lot of criticism. That's fine. This was more just a visual thing I wanted to show you guys. But basically, it's just a gigantic spider web of YouTube personalities of how they connect to each other using the YouTube algorithm, and how like someone from like Carl Benjamin or Sargon of Akkad may go to Dave Rubin or to Stefan Molyneux or whoever it may be.
That one racist kangaroo guy.
Right.
I forgot who that was.
I mean, one of my favorite things though is I do have to say, like, this is already a little bit dated because Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson are way off on the side. So it may want to help to get updated a little bit, just want to say. But I recommend looking at it nevertheless, which kind of brings me to my whole last point with the movement and the radicalization and everything. I need you to remember this has nothing to do with policies, with attitude, or issues that you want to stand on. The only thing that mattered was identity and resentment. Finding one's place in their own life and finding belonging in a community is huge, but that makes makes someone very susceptible to propaganda, especially right-wing propaganda. Because at the end of the day, political identity means nothing without the social groups that are attached to them. And if you can get somebody to hate on a different social group, you will change their politics. That's how psychology works. That's how this transformed tons of liberal white men into Trump MAGA hats or intellectual dark web, annoyingly frustrating centrists. It's an entire pipeline that was both generated naturally, but also manufactured with intent to gain and garner political power on the right. And for those of you who still don't believe in that something like this still matters for politics, I'll leave with one last study, which was done in 2020. It's one of my favorite studies to date that I learned in school, which is called Letter Activating Animus, the Uniquely Social Roots of Trump Support. Obviously, Trump took everyone by storm in 2016. Well, what was going on in 2016? The end of Gamergate and the still anti-SJW and anti-feminist movement. Out of anything else that this study found, resentment of different groups, especially minority groups, was shown to be the leading factor of Trump support. So if you showed high levels of resentment of differing groups than yourself, you had a much statistically higher chance of supporting Trump. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. It's not about partisanship. It's literally about hating other groups of people. And that's exactly what Gamergate did at the end of the day.
Yeah, don't forget Steve Bannon literally ran Trump's campaign in 2016.
Yes, he literally knew this as he was running that. That's why Trump's campaign had so much success online. It's because he knew how to tap into the internet culture the way, of course, Hillary Clinton did not know how to. And it's because...
You mean Pokemon Go to the polls didn't do it?
Oh, tell me about it. And it's because, whether we like it or not, internet culture is a real thing. And a lot of right-wingers are being, or well, I'll say a lot of people are being sucked into the right wing because of internet culture. And Democrats and liberals need to pay attention to what internet culture can do to politics. Because if you don't, we're going to have this becoming more of a problem in the future.
And I guess that's why we need Dark Brandon.
Ugh.
As much as I dislike it.
I mean, weirdly enough, kind of, yeah. We need our own online support and online visuals because obviously we already know Twitter is not everybody, clearly. Facebook is not everybody. For sure, 4chan, 8chan, Reddit, all the crazy places that right-wingers go is not reality. However, what it does happen is it creates an echo chamber where people can get easily radicalized, bring those ideas out and forth, and spread it like gospel to the rest of the country. And that's what ends up happening. So whether we like it or not, we have to get into these internet circles and start spreading real ideas that are not absolutely insane and conspiracy theories.
And racist and misogynist and
right.
Anti-trans and anti-LGBT.
Anti-poor people.
Yeah. AKA conservative.
Yeah. So I hope you found this valuable. I hope you will now understand the importance of what Gamergate was and what internet culture was back in the early 2010s and how it was able to literally radicalize a generation of especially white men today, where even though many of them are considered liberal or apolitical or non-political, it doesn't matter. It's all about forcing them to hate on other people. And I mean, it's literally doing what conservatives are accusing Democrats of doing, which is like, oh, they're trying to divide us against each other.
Or grooming.
Or yeah, it's literally, we are being... Oh my God, I said I get a revelation right now. You're being played if you still think this is about any legitimate issue. I have to say it. You are being played. Don't fall for the nonsense. Don't fall for the conspiracies. And know that this will always impact our real political world, whether you like it or not. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively.
Currently running for Senate in Philadelphia.
I mean, technically,
the city of Philadelphia.
You're technically right. He is running in there as well. And now it froze. Stuck.
Well, that's why I don't buy Apple products. Joe Rogan. God damn it. I'm looking at the words Joe Rogan. Joe Biden.
Well, at the time, at least for me, it was during the height of the world pandemic. Oh, man.